this one we actually covered in the spoiler room a number of years ago. I don't remember. I didn't revisit it to think of my thoughts then, but watching it recently, especially after watching Mad Max Fury Road a number of times and such, and the other ones, the first two are linear. You can see the growth of you can see the progression of part one to part two between Road Warrior and Mad Max. After that, it feels like they almost take this into a pulp novel approach to where Mad Max is just a character in it. And if you look at this one and you look at Fury Road as well, these stories could take place anywhere really in the Max timeline, even between 1 and 2, if you really want to get to it, because Mad Max stays true to a guy who feels like he doesn't really belong in society. He never does. He always gets roped into these things, but he really just wants to be left alone.
He's never really the star of the movie.
No, he's a guy who wants to be left alone in the wasteland. He's dealt with some of his demons. He's still carrying others, but he doesn't want to deal with people because people are crazy or a-holes, and he just doesn't want to deal with them. But he always ends up getting caught up and mixed up in these things. Like here, he goes to Bartertown solely to get his stuff back. Right. And then he's with the kids and he's reluctant. He's like, I'm not your captain, such and such. I'm not that guy. All right. He's the reluctant hero. And I like that approach. I like that idea of where they maybe were trying to go with this, where it's not so much an arc of the trilogy of the Mad Max character, but more of here's Mad Max in this situation. Here's what this character would do in this situation. Not necessarily here's the arc of Max of growing from this end to this end, because Mac, the Raggedy Man at the end of this, in all honesty, I don't get the feeling has changed too much. I have a feeling he goes, gets his stuff, and he takes, I
don't want to interrupt your review.
No, that's fine.
I do think that there is some progression to the Max character, because at the end of the Road Warrior, he is still in it for himself, and he is a reluctant hero, and he's driving that rig at the end of Road Warrior. And we had a discussion last week that he didn't know that he was the decoy, and he may not have even participated at all if he didn't have something in it for himself. Sure. He actually willingly sacrifices himself to save the kids at the end of this. It is a selfless act at the end of this to make sure those kids get away. And that's the first time. It is a redemption story in some ways for Max to find his humanity again. And I think it's the first time since he lost his wife and kids that he does something that's not for himself at the end of this movie. And that is the bookend of this 3-part trilogy.
He even reluctantly does it, though. I don't get the feeling like he's all like, hey, I'm going to go track down the kids now. He did something nice, and now he's done, and he's going back off into the woods. So, as far as the growth for his character, I still think he's the lone wolf dog, the lone dog, whatever, and he reluctantly, because he did have a kid and it brings him back. I see what you're saying, but for me, I still feel like it's just, here's this character who's gone through some crap. He's a really cool guy. He ends up getting put in these wild situations, and he ends up being the reluctant hero almost every time. And that's where I feel here. But what I think is here is what ended up happening in the mid 80s. And I may have mentioned it before, I don't know here, but in my podcast, I saw an interview once, I think it was with Bruce Willis, when he was actually on speaking terms with Kevin Smith and they were interviewing him. And he said in the mid 80s, they didn't know how to handle sequels. Right. It's a common thing now. But in the early 80s, sequels or an IP or anything was foreign concept to producers. So when they had a hit, they'd write a story to be that story. So they're not quite sure where they're going to go with it. And so they come out with Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome because now you have this PG-13 rating. As you say, they're trying to reach out to a new audience. So they do what they did with a number of other wonderful rated R properties that they wanted to go to a wider audience. They water it down to a PG-13 and make a lesser film. Conan did it with Conan the Destroyer. Was PG-13.
Agreed.
RoboCop did it. RoboCop 3 was PG-13, so they could sell toys.